Technical stuff going. Can everybody hear me? Better if I use this one. Well, hello everybody. I'm Niklas Eklund. I'm Associate Professor of Political Science, but I'm also linked with this project. I'll try not to do too much irony, obviously, and I will try to tell you a little bit about the stuff I've been working on inside this project. Mainly to do with one thing, which is my specialization also in this the research that we've been doing, is to do with conceptual capability. And I have to say, I admit that I was quite astonished by the discussion we had in the previous session here, where we wound up in a situation in the general discussion and quite a Q&A session basically, saying that perhaps the problem is with us, perhaps the problem is with Germany, perhaps we're being too democratic, perhaps we should unify and show more force and that type of thing. Astonished simply because this is basically what most Russian sources are saying, that it is a weakness to be democratic and not a strength. So I think perhaps this is something we can return to as we proceed during these 2 days. But you can see where I'm coming from. You see what kind of research I'm doing, what kind of work I'm basically performing here. I will say two things about the conceptual military capability in present-day Russia. Two things that are important. I'll start. I've been told to be brief. Obviously, I'm a professor of political science, so it's not in my work description normally. But I'll try to be very brief, so I'll start with my conclusions. Conclusion number one. Russia does have immense conceptual capability. It's based on a particular idea about the role and place of the military in society. So whereas we in Western contexts tend to problematize the role and place of the military historically, socially, economically, as in Sweden and a lot of other places, this is not the case in the Russian psyche, if I may put it like that. They have a historical sense of the role of the military as a core entity and reason of state. My second conclusion is basically that the same can be said for the role of state. In Russia, there is a very, very clear conceptualization of the role of the state in society, which is, again, to tie in with what was said in the previous session, something that we have done away with in most democratic countries, something that is supposed to be a part of a lively discussion, saying basically that if Germany, according to democratic principles, has an idea about the future of Europe, the role of Europe, and so on and so forth, that differs from others, then we at least need to sit down and have a serious discussion with them about what's going on. Again, this is not the case in Russian sources, not the way literature in Russia is produced. It's not the way the role of state is discussed in the Russian tradition, if I may call it like that. This is based on, my research basically has to do with what has been going on during the first 2 decades of the current millennium. A lot of the Western discussion, and I will permit myself to call it that, although I realize that in the Baltic countries probably you have a much closer and better idea, closer scrutiny of what goes on in the Russian discussion. Normally I speak to other Western audiences, but I would like to say that one of the really interesting things is that a lot of research in the West is saying basically that something happened towards the end of the first decade in Russia. And we're looking at a situation today where the conceptual power of Russia comes as a new idea. I would say that that's not true. In my own research, I tend to always go back to the white paper of 2003 and the first presidency of President Putin, where the new ideas shone through. But if you look at it in terms of military sources, journals, other types of military sources, there's an age-old discussion. And the discussion also went on in the 1990s. Although Russia was unable to project militarily, there was nothing wrong with the intellectual discussion. Again, I'm an avid reader of Военное мысль mainly. I think this is a very good source in terms of keeping track of the development of knowledge in military affairs, the current role of military in Russian society, and also some of the projected ideas on how to do war. Now, we will not spend more time on this, obviously. I've been doing operational art for several years, which, you know, I could go on forever probably about this. We shall hear much more about this in the next presentations. But there are some things, studying Russia and Russian sources from a knowledge of philosophy, if you like, that type of perspective. One of them is the fact that we have to remember, given my two conclusions at the outset, that it's us, we're the ones doing geopolitics. And this is rooted firmly in the general discussion. It's certainly rooted in the academic discussion, and even more so in the military academic discussion in the Russian system. We are the ones doing geopolitics. We are the ones threatening them, not vice versa. Now, you could say that this is all wrong. They've got it backwards. I might even agree, but the problem is they do. In the West, we continually discuss war as some kind of cosmopolitan problem. It's to do with democracy. It's to do with the way we construct politics in our own countries. Ultimately, it's a question of individual responsibility, individual wants and needs. This is not so in the Russian setting. At the same time, and this is something, again, in terms of philosophical viewpoints, science, social science mainly, but also the humanities, we still have a problem of collective behavior and collectivity in our systems. So if at some point we say that we need to become more collective, we have to support our collective actors, i.e. the state, in a more unitary way, I guess we're playing to the tune of the Russian fiddle. Again, we will be speaking more about the 6th and 7th generation warfares. It's going to be very concrete after I'm done with the intellectual poppycock up here. But again, I would like to show you this image just to remind you that there is a very solid, academically viable base for the way Russia thinks about military affairs and the role of state in the world. I had the honor, I should say, of visiting Moscow in March. It was still possible back then. I'm not so sure I can do it now. But it was interesting for me to browse bookstores and look at just regular first-level university course books. Is there a particular image projected to young people in Russia when they start their academic careers, in a sense? Is there a sense of a particular knowledge that they need to know? Yes, there is. And the particular knowledge that pervades pretty much all university texts and university books published in Russia by Russian authors is about the particular role of Russia in the world. Is there a philosophical base for all of this? Well, I think there is. And it's to do with one very simple idea, basically. In Russian science, civil and military, the idea of postmodernism and postmodern perspectives is simply rejected. It's back to basics, empirical research, proven evidence-based statements, that type of thing. And I think a lot of what we can see in terms of military development in Russia is the fact that evidence-based ideas about what to do in the field, what machines will work and don't work and so on and so forth, is along the lines of this particular scientific philosophy. So modernization, again, looking at Russia, becomes a relative term. The way to the future also becomes a relative thing. What's the problem with the stuff I've been saying so far? Well, again, I'm a civilian. I'm looking at this from civil, military, interactive, that type of conceptual framework. It's interesting for us, and I just took one example here. I've been reading Lauren Graham's work, American, obviously, extensively. And I think a lot of what's said there is right. But I think that the gauge that we're using when we look at the ideational structure, the development of theory, that type of thing in the Russian system, the gauge we're using is slightly off. It's not actually the one we should be using. What we say in the West is, for the most part, Russia is not intellectual enough to compete. Russia does not have theories the way we do in the West. Lauren Graham writes about this extensively. I think it's interesting. A lot of the stuff that he says probably is right in purely civilian terms. The gauge we're using is we're saying they are not as good as we are intellectually and scientifically because they don't market their stuff the way we do. On the other hand, is that the proper gauge to use? What's interesting, particularly if you look at it in terms of military theoretical development and evidence-based use of military equipment, ideas, operational principles, and so on and so forth, what's really interesting about that is they always seem to have the ability to do a lot of stuff with very little. And competitively, not in market terms, well, we could argue about that as well, I suppose, but competitively, they're right up there with the best in the world. I will finish off by saying, and I'm sorry to take so much time then, one of the things I started out by saying is basically they do have their conceptual stuff in place, particularly in terms of the role of the military in society and the role of state in society. Democracies have a civilian mindset, authoritarian systems don't. So the question we must ask ourselves is, are we going to be more democratic or less democratic? The less democratic we become in our mindset, the less we emphasize individualism, cosmopolitanism, the typical democratic values that we should be embracing. The less we do that, the more like the Russian mindset we become. There is a very well thought through and conceptual military capability, I think, and again, I'm not going to go into all the sources here that I've been studying, but I think probably here in this country and among you, your analysts here, I think probably there's a lot of agreement on this. We also have to remind ourselves then that academic capabilities, knowledge, intellectual work does have a high social status in Russian society. Now that's something that we in democracies, I think, probably to some extent at least, are beginning to lose. That's something interesting to think about. Patriotism imbues the system of scholarly and academic knowledge. We probably need a renewed discussion on patriotism, particularly in Europe. What does patriotism mean? If I go to America and visit my friends and colleagues there, I get a very clear sense of what patriotism is. If I go to Russia, I get a similar sense of patriotism. In Europe, as always, we're fairly wishy-washy when it comes to these things. Military know-how is different from civilian know-how. But how much does military knowledge need to be marketable to be effective? I'll leave that question hanging. And I also think that probably something we can return to in our discussion here, which is very, very interesting, is the current tendency in Russia to embrace market solutions, most notably in terms of marketing their military know-how and hardware. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Differently from the previous speaker who spoke mostly on theoretical things, philosophies, mentality, trying to prove that Russians are also thinkers, we are developing ideas and things like that, I will concentrate my presentation on pure instrument Russians are using to create this force we are using right now, we are dreaming to have in the future. It's an academical presentation which usually lasts 2 hours, and I give that in the Lithuanian Military Academy. This is not the case here. So some slides would be taken from that. Just read yourself without my comments. I will try to put the emphasis only on particular features of Russian military reform, which seems to me an important one to know for everybody of us. The first thing I guess I need to tell you anymore is what was already said, that all the reform, all the ideas Russians are implementing right now are deeply thought before. All the ideas were theory-based, field-tested, and seriously run. I will present a couple of evidences I guess, supporting my things. The second very important thing is that the reform is designed to create a new type of military force. It is almost finished. It's not finished yet. It's in the middle of the way. They passed the break point. It's impossible to return. So better or worse, they will have a new military. It allows already to use the military they got. That's why you will see in my presentation changes in the military leadership, because the mission is slightly different. The creation of the forces is already almost finished. You have to run the forces. The second very important thing is that the reform is covering not the MOD only. It covers entire state. And those things are happening right now. In a week, the new creature, so-called National State Defense Coordination Center, will be authorized in Russia. I will talk about this as well. And it's not finished. There are still a couple more interesting things to come, and I will try to present those. So, no, I'm not going to talk about all those theoretical things. The only thing what I want to say that the political will to have a new type of military was expressed already back in the early 2000s. In the military doctrine, in the political speeches, when the Russians realized that a new type of military, like Americans had, was able to defeat an old-type military Iraqis had. So the political guidances were put in famous Ivanov's doctrine, which described that we do not need any more mobilizational, huge Soviet-type army able to fight global wars. We need to have the army which is able to go right now to win a local war, to do this business done, and in case of global war, we have to have mobilization as a reserve option. General Staff took that idea. It took 2 years for them to develop the concept of so-called strategic command, and they presented that and got approval, not in Moscow, unfortunately. An opposition was in Moscow, so Ivanov, at that time as defense minister, left to the Far East, picking up the right people to run the reform. And this is one of the interesting things I want to draw attention. Very interesting appointment policies. When the same level commanders suddenly started to be appointed by presidential decree and ministerial order. Right now, I'm pretty certain the guys who were selected and trusted, they were appointed by the presidential decree. Couple of examples. General Colonel Tkachov, he was appointed as a head of experimental Joint Strategic Command. He ran all the testings in the Far East Military District, headed by General Colonel Bulgakov. Exercises like Baikal 2006, Vostok-type series were used as a cover to do a lot of testings. When testings were finished, the command was disbanded. And of course, when everything was approved, you have to have a man who runs the reform. As I said, this meant destruction, total destruction of former Soviet military. So no one who used to dress the uniform would go for that task. That's why they found the Serdikov, the guy outsider who cares nothing about the military. Valoevsky retired, he left to the security board, and only afterwards, in October 15, 2008, they announced an official start of reform. So all the long period before that was hidden, and nobody was even paying attention to that. What kind of forces they are trying to build? This is the fragment from Ivanov's doctrine. At that time, they decided it should be forces able to act instantly without any preparations, and the level of ambition, 2.5 conflict, similar to the level of ambitions the West used to have at that time. What was the offer? The war should be fought by the operational forces, similar like Americans are having right now. Tactical level, a new brigade, self-sufficient, independent, maneuverable unit which is able to perform the mission with minimal support. At that time, Russians lacked air power, long, precise guided munition. Operational level, headquarters responsible for the particular mission of particular operation. Joint Strategic Command, jointness with the geographical area assigned or joint missions assigned. And of course, a long array of institutional forces with the main purpose to support them. I will run briefly through all of those. How the operation force is supposed to look, and right now are looking. The scheme was produced 3 years ago for the Finnish Defense University. That's why some boxes are in a dotted line. Right now, it's not true anymore. All those boxes are already existing. Joint Strategic Command level, for general purpose Joint Strategic Commands, those are new military districts. The specialized Joint Strategic Commands, nuclear forces, rapid reaction forces, and space forces, has been finished just recently. Nuclear forces, October 12, 2012, the certification exercise run and described briefly, or even widely, not briefly, in military magazines and media in Russia. Joint Strategic Command Rapid Reaction Forces, certified this year during the snap check exercise in the Joint Strategic Command Center. The main purpose for that command was to run operations abroad. And if you go to the open sources, you will find that the headquarters managed to get power to plan operation and to conduct it within 72 hours. Joint Strategic Command Space supposed to be finished, at least as it is declared, on the 1st of January 2016. Other changes which are happening right now or happened some time ago, as I said, you had to get rid of all militaries, personnel included. No one who used to wear a uniform would be able to fire thousands and thousands of soldiers. Serdikov did. 142,000 NCOs fired in one day. Of course, when you get a new structure, you have to have NCOs. That's why they brought that. Fulfilling or manning the army. Professionalism is a very important thing. Russians are moving towards that. Right now, today, a couple of weeks ago, Shoigu made a statement saying that the number of professionals is equal to the number of conscripts we are having right now. The plans are even more, to have about 500,000 of conscripts, or 500,000 of professional soldiers, with conscripts remaining as a main source for the reinforcement. Educational institutions, again, during the reform, in the beginning of the reform, entire educational system was ruined, a new one created. While the new forces were built, of course, officers were not requested. That's why there were 2 years of military institutions functioning without cadets. Right now, admission is accepted and actually reaching the level of the Soviet times. Units have to be trained. This is already being fought in Russia. These famous combat training centers, I guess everybody read about, the first one being built close to Moscow in Molino with assistance of Germany, which was postponed, but based on open sources, Russians say that only red ribbon was not delivered. So we will see. It's going to be operational in first digits of December. Armament. Again, the same case. All the system is reviewed. All existing storages has to be eliminated, new ones created. Manufacturing logistic complex, again a new concept which is being implemented right now. Those storages would be located in the different locations, but the main thing is to have everything what the operational forces might need at the place at the right moment. The same to be said about new reserves. I will talk a little bit later. Separate storages, already concept developed, and there are a couple of those running in Far East and Siberia. And if somebody was following Vostok 2014 exercise, you noticed the message that one of the brigades from Western Military District was taken to that area, got into that place, got all the equipment, and within a couple of days was ready to go and perform the mission. Reserves, as I already mentioned, Russians are borrowing a lot from Americans. Looks like active reserve system is going to be very similar to American active reserve system. When reservists would sign a contract, would get a pay. At the same time, they will be assigned to their units. They will go to the trainings on a regular basis. The rest of them would go to the mobilizational resource and would be called in case of total mobilization. The same to be said on changing locations on military garrisons. You know very well that Russia postponed or announced moratorium on CFE treaty right before the reform starts, so it would be no more possibility, and there are no more possibility for the Western inspections to go and see what is going on. Right now, just recently, they presented the typical modular structure for the new military garrisons, which should be typical, should be easy to disassemble and move to another locations if it's required. So Serdikov performed the mission. He created the frame, he created almost a usable mechanism, and right now he is not needed anymore. You need a guy who is able to run, to polish, to oil that mechanism to continue. So Serdyukov has to go. He leaves. Shoigu comes. I guess you do not need to be told what the Shoigu is. He's a very good administrator, but he understands one very particular thing of Russian mentality. A man dressed in a uniform is much more effective. That's why the second day, the magic change happens. For the Westerners, it seems like it's not important. For the Russian, it's very important one. Right now, there are no more civilians. All they are in their uniforms. As I said, reform is being moved out to the state level. This is under the modernization of general staff. We are changing all the way we are going to manage the state in the case of war, in the case of peace. So-called National State Defense Coordination Command and Control Center is the center responsible to control all the ministries and institutions included into the State Defense Plan, by the way, signed by the President a couple of years ago, which includes 50 institutions being under one command. And this is going to be 24/7, 365 days. How the center looks like? It's going to be unifying center, allowing supreme political leadership to operate. That's why we are having Supreme Commander Cell, military operations cell, including nuclear operations, and the most important thing, the remaining ministers being under the Defense Support Cell, monitored and controlled daily. Here you could read, this center is being created right now, and as I said, it will be finalized or baptized, at least officially, 1st of December. It's a huge concentration of power in one hand. Why I'm telling that? Just a very simple example. This is the command control of the state, which used to be in the Soviet times and in the early Russian times. When you see President, Security Council, Ministry of Defense, governmental and other institutions, so it's like a normal daily peaceful business. In the wartime, it's supposed to become like a stavka Stalin used to have in the Second World War. Remember, when the war started, he created a stavka which was overarching and controlling everything. This is exactly what was foreseen in the Soviet mobilization plan and in Russian mobilization plan. This is what we are getting when we are getting this new structure. If you see any differences, I would be pleased to be told about those. Couple more things to come. You got the troops, you are already using them. I'm not going to talk about Crimea and all other things. You need to arm them. Arms are quite expensive. That's why in the first stage, we are going to stick to the modernization of the arms and delivering new arms, modernized ones in the units. My colleague will continue providing you more details. The thing is that this is supposed to end at the year 2015, 2016. Later, the new generation arms supposed to come. Armata, Boomerang, Kurganets, you name them. This is going to be changed in the slight change in the organization of brigades. This is the example of land forces brigades. They are already experimenting on those brigades and presenting something, some thoughts, some successes and failures in the open sources as well. If you go, you might find it. My conclusions. I would say that reform was not accidentally happening. It was well thought through, very well tested in the fields, with the serious personnel selected. Of course, we are having problems, but so far, despite all the problems, I guess we are still showing strong political will to continue and to finish that reform. My feeling is that if they succeed, we will have the most important thing, affordable military, which would be quite efficient and able to act without early warning. I might be wrong because I'm relying on open sources, but there is a man who knows better the situation because he has access to all the sources. This is what he said just a few days ago. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, a rough translation of this text is that there are 100 means to drag out the Russian bear from his bear pit, but there is no one who has an idea to get him back there. And obviously the Russian bear is out of the pit for the moment. And that is obvious It's obvious from what we have seen on the Crimea and also the recent incidents in the Baltic area, which they have increased since the last few years. And my opinion is that these incidents are, to a certain extent, more aggressive than they were during the Cold War. But this more aggressive stance from the Russian side, that means that the Russian political leadership is willing and risking to use the military as a means for force projection and to intimidate their neighbors. And that is the result of the development of the Russian armed forces since 2008. And I will try to give a picture of what has happened and also try to assess that development. First of all, when it comes to command and control, the National Command Center has also already been mentioned. But I'm not quite sure that that center that will be fully operational by 1st of December will work as it is thought to work. If you read the article where the Chief of the General Staff has described the task of the command center, I'm a little afraid of that this center will end up like a meltdown of too much information and exhausted decision makers. There is a risk with this center. And also, this center invites to micromanagement, and that was obvious during an exercise the 8th of May this year. And that runs a little counter to the ideas of creating a new officer, an officer who is more independent and able to take independent decisions. Secondly, we have the creation of the 4 operational strategic commands in 2010, and that's a new thing from a Russian perspective. But in fact, it's rather an old idea because the Russian has transformed the way they exercise operational strategic command during the Warsaw Pact times when we have the TVD staffs, and that idea is transformed into Russia. And we also have a very strong emphasis on civilian military coordination and cooperation. And that was obvious during Zapad last year and also during the exercise Vostok this year. And that means that there is a close connection between the civilian and military society and where the General Staff has the authority to make these decisions regarding coordination and cooperation. When it comes to force structure, there has happened a lot. The old divisions are gone. We will, from next year, see the 1st Arctic Brigade up in the north. There have been changes within the Air Force, where the old air regiments are a thing of the past, at least for the moment, and they have changed into air bases. But that process is reversed as a result of the exercise in July last year. We have also seen changes in the airborne forces and changes that reflects the role of the airborne forces as a rapid reaction force. For example, there are a number of air assault brigades previously subordinated to the military districts that now have been re-subordinated to the airborne forces. When it comes to procurement of equipment, as you see, prior to 2008, the delivery of modern equipment or new equipment was rather modest, and that led to that the percentage of modern equipment in the Russian armed forces in 2012 was just 10%. This year, a large number of equipment has been delivered, and you see the figures on the right-hand side of the slide. And that's from a recent report given to the Russian Duma, but those figures are not accurate. In fact, there is more equipment delivered than this. And in the end of the year, we will probably see the exact figures. The interesting thing when it comes to procurement is that up till today, it's only modernized equipment that has been delivered. that is equipment with a Soviet origin. 2015 and 2016 will be a milestone, because after that we will see the infusion of new equipment. For example, the new fighter T-50, the new families of armored vehicles, etc., etc. When it comes to manning, the target is to have a personal strength of 1 million men and women. Last year, they haven't reached that goal, but they are striving to reach that goal for this year. And what they have been able to do, or what they have been successful with, is recruiting contract soldiers. This year, it is said that they have recruited more than 70,000 contract soldiers. And that's very good so far. But there is another side of the coin. How many are they able to retain? The unofficial number of those contract soldiers who are leaving the Russian armed forces is 35,000. And that should be compared with the official figures, 15,000. And most of those who leave because of health reasons, or they do not fulfill what is said in the contract. What is also ongoing, that is the work to build up some kind of mobilization reserve. It was mentioned by the previous speaker about the mobilization reserve and the mobilization resource. We will see what will come out of that, and by 2015 it's said that they will have 2 mobilization brigades manned by contract soldiers. And we will see how that ends up. Next slide, please. When it comes to training and exercises, that is a very intense area. But to a certain extent, they are doing things that contradict each other. First of all, they are introducing new training areas and new equipment. For example, laser simulators, electronic ranges, and so on. On the other hand, they are introducing a large number of competitions. In August, we had a tank biathlon in Moscow, and that's just one competition. We have a number of them. For example, in the airborne forces, to select the best airborne platoon, in the signal troops, etc., etc. And having such a number of competitions and focus on competitions, that is not something that is beneficial for the military capability. Because if you have a competition, you tend to focus on the competition and forget a lot of other important things. Next, please. Well, will they succeed or not? We are now writing 2014, and the reform should be finished by 2020. And there are a number of ifs on the way. First of all, we have 6 years left, and nobody has ever been able to predict the future. And there are a lot of events that can happen, both internally in Russia and externally. And in this aspect, this year is a turning point. Because until now, the Russians could reform and develop their armed forces in relative peace and quiet. I don't think they can do that for the next 6 years as a result of what they have done in Crimea, and also the more aggressive stance they have. We have the economy. The Russian economy does not develop as predicted. Will that have an impact on the armed forces? We don't know. But on the other hand, Mr. Putin, he is keen on prioritizing the military. And my impression is that the military will be first in the line when it comes to dividing the economic assets. And that means that other sectors in the society will suffer, for example, health and education. We have the state of the defense industry, which in certain instances is rather lamentable. And we have examples of equipment that is said to be produced or introduced at a certain date, but has been delayed. One such example is the new anti-air missile system S-500, which is delayed 2 years. And another example is the armored vehicle Boomerang, which should be shown on the 9th of May next year. But that will not happen because they have problems with developing that vehicle. We have the impact of the recent sanctions. Well, will they have an impact or not? The Russians say, well, it's no problem, we can overcome them. But I think they will present a problem for the Russian armed forces. We have demography. The young generation in Russia today was produced in the 1990s when the Russians had other things on their minds than making babies. And that is a problem because there is less number to recruit as officers, conscripts, and contract soldiers. And they have to compete with other sectors in the society. We have the health factor. I won't go into that, but that means that in certain cases, those recruited into the armed forces do not meet the medical requirements. And last but not the least, attraction. How attractive is the armed forces for the young Russians? And can they keep up that attraction over time? We'll see. Today, at least to a recent poll, the armed forces are rather popular, but can they keep up that popularity for a number of years? Next slide, please. So this is my conclusion. We have a resurrected bear, but he is resurrected only partly. So I leave it to you to read this for yourself, and with this I end my presentation.
Are you done? Fast readers. Okay. I shall complete this presentation and talk about the new generation of Russian warfare. Okay. This is the articles and books that you can study to go deeper into this. And as you can see here, the Russians, they haven't been lazy about these things. And this has happened all the time. But very few of us had read this. Next, please. The society is the target in this new kind of warfare. The political and economic level of the society. It's not the military. So, a state should defend its people. I'm not sure that this town is defended by the state. And I live in the middle of this. Next, please. It is very clear that the political and military leadership is very tight. The military should achieve the political objectives. And we can see here that they talk about the new generation wars in medium and long terms. And we can also see that they emphasize on information warfare and anti-participatory operation, or Maskirovka. That will be the most important things to be successful in this new kind of war. And we also can recognize that they still talk about the importance of surprise. The Crimea operation was a strategic and operational surprise and success. And we can also see that being reactive in your doctrine and in your defense is not a winning concept. Next, please. So, we have a good friend in Riga, Janis Berzins. He has written a very comprehensive report on what would happen if the Russians used this kind of warfare against Latvia. And here is the main phases of that kind of warfare. Emphasize on information and psychological warfare. Have we seen that? Asymmetric actions. And one of these asymmetric actions has been very clear stated in the White Book from 2004, to get the countries close to you to reduce the military spendings. They have been very successful with that, if I look to my own country. Also, if you look at the NATO countries. And what they talk about is to manipulate the key elements of a nation, the politicians, the military, and other leading actors. And they use both hard and soft methods, as you can see here. And if it goes further, they will promote interstate warfare, as we can see in Ukraine. And it's not necessary to conduct the last phases if you have been successful in the first phases. Because this is not about occupation, this is about to win influence. And you don't need to use military means for that. But if you need to use it, they will be used in a massive form. And when we had done war games on this new kind of warfare, our society collapsed quite fast. Next, please. This is one of the most important books written about the Russian view of military theory. And if you read what this author has written, you can get a little scared. He say that NATO prepare war against Russia. He say that patriotism is the most important thing in Russia, more important than the economy and the development of other parts of the society. He also states that the finest work you ever can have is to be an officer and to defend your own country. And they talk about possibilities of a new world war. Of course, This is a part of information operations. But you have seen here that they had put all the state capabilities together in a national synergy. They show us that they prepare their people for war. It doesn't mean that they will conduct war, but they make preparations for it. And that things worry us. I think that's the end, is it? No. So this is one part of this war. So we have a political, informational, and economic war against Russia today. And this is, they're fighting back against us. This is one of the instruments, and I'm sure you will discuss this in some of the groups later on. So that will end our presentation of the Russian armed forces. We have tried to give you a view of the conceptual development and capabilities, the physical capabilities, but we have not discussed the most important thing, the moral factor and what kind of intentions the Russians have. But I'm sure you will be interested to discuss that further on. Thank you very much.
Until 1:15.
Okay.
So, who would like to ask the first question?
Hello, Edward Lucas. I wonder if you could talk a bit more about the inefficiencies in procurement of weapons. We've seen a lot of difficulties in getting the big stuff going, particularly planes and naval vessels and submarines. A lot of failure on the Bulava missile program. And I'm also interested if anyone would like to say a little bit more about the modernization of the tactical nuclear weapons arsenal.
Could you please repeat your question?
Yes, nucleus, the big stuff, planes, submarines, big missiles. They don't seem to be doing very well on that. And I just wondered if you could expand a bit on the difficulty of the big procurements. And then secondly, on the tactical nuclear weapons, which they've put a lot of effort into, which is obviously a cause of concern here. If someone would like to elaborate a bit on how the use of nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons in their doctrine and how strong their arsenal and delivery systems really are.
When it comes to strategical nuclear weapons, they are modernizing their submarine fleet. They are going to have 8 new missile-carrying submarines until 2020. They are modernizing the fleet of missile-carrying aircraft, and they will introduce a new aircraft, strategic aircraft, about 2025. That is at least the plans. When it comes to the strategic rocket troops, they are renewing their arsenal, and they are going to have a new missile, I think, 2018 or something like that. And they will also introduce, at least they have said, to introduce a new railroad-based missile. When it comes to technical nuclear weapons, there is very little written about it in open sources. But what you can gather is, for example, they put great emphasis on Iskander and its capability to carry tactical nuclear weapons. But apart from that, there is very, very little written about it. It will be interesting to see what they write in the new doctrine that is said to appear in December. If they expand on the subject on the use of nuclear weapons, both strategic or tactical. I think that doctrine will be an interesting Christmas gift for all the Russian watchers.
If I may, just to add a little bit. Yes, Russians are experiencing some problems with acquiring new weapons, modernizing them. There are a number of cases related to the missile defense, S-400 systems, S-500 systems, delivering APCs, infantry fighting vehicles, developing the armata. There are different messages coming. But what is important to realize? They face the problems, we try to solve that problems. There is a problem related to the technological sanctions. Right now we are working, we are accepting that. We are trying to solve that problem. Will they succeed or not? This is the question for the intelligence to answer. Regarding nuclear things, at least my personal opinion is, and what I'm observing in the recent years, since the Joint Strategic Command was established and all nuclear legs were gathered under one umbrella, looks like we are relying more on strategic deterrence. Tactical weapons and blackmail was important when they were weak conventionally. At that time, yes, it worked out. They were talking about preemptive strikes and things like that. When they are getting stronger conventionally, I guess that right now the emphasis would go to the strategical nuclear weapons, because looking from the simple rational logic, it makes no sense to use tactical nuclear weapons. At least you are losing the battle, but so far we are gaining conventional strength. Thank you.
I am Colonel Gintaras Bagdonas, Lithuanian Army. Thank you very much for your interesting presentations. My question, does any one of you possess budget data, military budget data, and how the financial planning for our defense expenses are affected by current economic recession in Russia, collapse of gas, oil prices in the market? Thank you.
There has been a debate about the military budget for the next 3 years. And obviously, the military budget will comprise 4.2% of GDP next year, and then decline to 3.7% of GDP. And there was, my impression is that there was a rather intense debate prior to the decision to reach these figures. But obviously, from what I have read in Russian open sources, this emphasis on the military means that it will be less assets allocated to the health sector and to the education sector. If this will remain after 2017, we don't know. It depends on how the Russian economy develops and how the impact of the sanction is felt.
Thank you. I also would like to thank you for this interesting presentation. I have one particular question related to the links to or connections of the Russian military industry to the outside world, the abroad. We, of course, in the open, we see only, well, the big gadgets like Mistral ships being under construction and delivered and so on and so on. But there is apparently more than that, much more than that. I mean, coming from abroad and being injected into Russian military system, industry. I came across in the open sources across the mentioning that actually about 90% of electronics, that means chips, microchips, semiconductors, integral systems, about 90%, 90, in Russian armament system, they come from abroad. So it's import. It might be wrong, maybe it's a wrong source, but it's tremendous. I mean, the percentage is very high. So, and it goes more than that. We can speak about optics in drones being produced, for Russian drones being produced in Czech Republic or somewhere else. We talk about the engines for military trucks. We, as I said, Mistral ships and some other smart things. So by changing attitude, couldn't we have a more leverage or impact on the way how the Russian military system is developing? Thank you.
Russia has a long tradition of cooperation with the West when it comes to military technology. For example, they worked with the French company Thales when it comes to sites for tanks, etc. And they made a great effort to import military equipment from abroad during Serdukhov. We have the Mistrals, we have the unmanned aerial vehicles from Israel, we had the Italian armored vehicles, etc. In addition to this, they had launched a cooperation program with Italy about submarines. They launched a program with France to develop armored vehicles, this so-called Atom, and some other programs. But these programs, at least the Mistral, the UAVs, and the Italian armored vehicles, they were subjected to a rather harsh critic. And the result was that the procurement or the writing of the contracts for these objects had not been done in a satisfactory manner. And that was probably part of the critique that was directed against Serdukhov after he was forced to leave. Now all these contracts are more or less cancelled. The Russians have built the number of Italian designed armored vehicles that they were supposed to do, and they won't build anymore. They have cancelled the cooperation with Italy. They have cancelled the cooperation with France with regard to Atom, etc., etc. And also, Prime Minister Medvedev, he introduced some kind of embargo, or call it embargo, in January this year. And the idea was that the Russian military industry should try to use only equipment that is produced internally, and to not use what could be brought abroad. You could see that as a measure of being independent, but also you could see that as a signal prior to the annexation of Crimea, because they probably reckon with Western sanctions. But so far, the Russians have said that, okay, we are victims of the sanctions, but it doesn't matter. Some people say we will overcome this problem within 1 year, and the more pessimistic say, okay, we will overcome this in 5 years. But we will have to see what will happen if these sanctions have an impact or not. And then it will be, well, we will not probably see the new equipment being introduced as they have planned to do.
Just a couple of things to add. Yes, you're absolutely right. 90% this is electronics, what they are officially accepting that they are missing, and right now it's the highest priority for the military industrial complex. Rogozin is not hiding that. He's telling that openly. And there are already indications in the open sources that a number of research institutes are given additional resources to solve that problem. And as it was already mentioned here, they had quite a big cooperation. France was helping a lot, developing, SAGEM was helping develop communication systems. Thales. Right now we are switching, for example, optics from Czech might be possible substituted by Belarusian optics. We are also making some proposals to have some joint research projects with Chinese, with some other countries, you know, India case and all those things. Why we are using that? Mostly due to get experience and to inherit some technologies. We are having problems. Technical problems are very important, and technologies is one of the Achilles' place for them.
Yes, perhaps on a more generic level, although from sort of a social science generic perspective, I think it's interesting. The question I think we should be asking ourselves when we talk about long-term and short-term is, what do we actually mean when it comes to the economic development and so on and so forth. A couple of observations that can be made from the general, or should you say public discussion, public sources in Russia is, first of all, that we say that a market is a market. They say it's not. According to them, and according to public parlance at least, what we consider a market is an administrative system skewed towards Western interests and so on and so forth, which is just, you know, by way of a remark, I'd say that I think we need to look very closely at what we mean when we talk about markets and world markets, because there are all kinds of political issues and agendas that crop up once we start doing that. Why am I mentioning that? Is because one particularly interesting thing that I think we really should keep our eyes on right now is what goes on in terms of privatization in Russia. And particularly, you know, the decision that's still in the Duma, I think, is still lying there to wait for a decision on the ability for forces to actually privatize and market themselves globally and so on and so forth, according to what is basically a Western model. That's going to change a lot of things around, I think, in terms of whose security and all that. But it's also going to affect markets, in a sense. And it's certainly, it's not, going back to what Lauren Graham particularly has been writing about problems in marketing academic products, academic produce, I might even say, in the Russian system. We could be looking at something completely new over the next 10 to 15 years in global markets with regard to how military hardware, military personnel as private entities interact with the production of knowledge, and what that might do to the production of knowledge, know-how, technology, and all that stuff in Russia proper and the Russian economy. So I think there's some kind of market change taking place in Russia, as in other places in the world, policy-driven a lot of the time, that we need to look very closely at. In general, again, long-term and short-term, I think we are, in democratic countries, we think long-term, we say 4 to 5 years. Because that's the number of years it takes for a government to change place or leave their chairs. I'm not sure that's the Russian definition.
And I think if we look at the import of electronic components in Sweden, it's over 90%. And I can tell you that we have one harbor that handle a majority of our imports. And that tells us something about weaknesses in our society. Okay, more questions, please.
Hello, my name is Carolina Vendel-Pallin. I head the Russia program at the Swedish National Defense Research Agency. And we have conducted research on Russian military capability for a number of years. So thank you for very thought-provoking and interesting presentations. I find myself in a funny position. I mean, we've been talking about how Russian military capability is increasing ever since basically 1999, when you had the first Sapad exercise again. And people will be saying it's from a very low level, they're so corrupt, nothing's going to come of it. And now suddenly I find myself often saying, wait a minute, they're not that strong. So I'm sort of changing positions. First of all, I very much like the way you've been studying military capability, dividing it into conceptual physical and moral components. So I'd like you to, as you said, say something about how you intend to study the moral component. I think it's absolutely true that the armed forces, they're very well perceived of in the Russian society. But on the other hand, that's not matched by a willingness to serve in the Russian armed forces. So I'd like you to expand a little on that. And also on the role of hazing for Russian military capability. You mentioned how different competitions actually lower capability. I mean, I would say that hazing is also an important factor in this. Secondly, the two last presentations, there was almost one presentation gave the official, I think, numbers, the plans, and the next presentation problematized those plans. It would be interesting to see how do you have the same picture? Are there 1 million men, or is it about 800,000? I know there was a figure, Shoigu, he managed to raise the level with 70,000 in one stroke. Alexander Gold says it's because students who are doing the military course were actually listed as NCOs. I'd like you to comment on that. And just a couple of comments. When it comes to the defense budget, well, if Russian GDP contracts, then we're going to have a larger portion of the GDP going to defense, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have more money, especially if you have a high inflation. And secondly, when it comes to, I'm not sure whether we're on 6th or 7th generation warfare, I would argue that in Crimea, we had a very efficient operation. When they tried the same thing in eastern Ukraine, they were actually bogged down in something that's very traditional, conventional warfare. So, just as a comment.
Yeah, first, thank you very much for the questions. One major problem is how to attract people to the Russian armed forces. And if we look at the conscripts, it's around 1/3 they get from one cohort. So that's really problematic. Why can't they attract more people? And we can also see that even in the special forces, they have problem to keep their people. So there is some problem here, and we will address this with special competence, special Russian competence that should look at these moral factors. Jürgen?
When it comes to hazing, the Russians claim that is a problem of the past, and the number of incidents have declined the last few years. And that is partly a result also of introducing the military police. But I'm not quite sure that hazing has disappeared, because hazing is, from the beginning, related to the service term for the conscripts. You have an older generation terrorizing a younger generation. But now you have a number of contract soldiers. And the question is, will they exercise some hazing towards the conscripts or the younger soldiers? So my impression is that the problem will remain, but the extent, well, that's hard to tell. Your question when it comes to the figure of contract soldiers and the possibility that they had included conscripts, I'm not quite sure about that, because from this year or from the autumn, it is possible for the conscripts to choose between 1 year of conscription and 2 years as a contract soldier. But that system is very newly introduced, and I'm not quite sure. I haven't seen any figures how many conscripts who have chosen the option to become a conscript soldier. And figures in general is very difficult, because the figures varies from one source to another. And it's those figures that we have presented here, those are our best understanding of the situation right now.
And a comment on sixth-generation warfare also. Vladimirov, he talks about 4 different kinds of warfare, and existential warfare, and that is what I think you can label the warfare in Ukraine. And he talked about culture warfare, and that is the information, that is a psychological warfare. And he talked about non-contact warfare, and that is the technical aspect of having underwater system that is distance, autonomous systems, long-range precision weapons, and for the last thing he talks about war is about the continuous war, that it will always be a conflict and a war between countries. It's only different levels of war. And in that case, you can say that the information warfare is running, the economic warfare is running, and also culture warfare is running against Russia. Yeah.
If I may just add a couple of, I guess, quite important things to know regarding hazing or bullying, you name it. Yes, I support my colleague. Actually, those facts are still existing, but the number is reduced, and I will tell you why. It was a common phenomenon during the Soviet times when at first conscripts served for 2 years and activities were limited, mostly due to a lack of men and all of the different reasons. We were sitting in the barracks, starving, having nothing to do and bullying each other. Right now, conscription is reduced to 1 year. Almost half of it is spent in the training centers to prepare the soldier. You have to prepare it. The second one, bullying usually was expressed by forcing young soldiers to do some kind of dirty jobs. Right now, outsourcing is implied. So we are marketing, we are having civilians do that. We are imposing a lot of military police. It was once mentioned. We are imposing the so-called mobile alliance, so the soldier could call the commander. You do not need to forget the religion getting involved. Right now, there are about close to 300 military chaplains. The first order the Shoigu signed when he became a defense minister, he made this number 4 times bigger. There are about 1,000 positions of military chaplains in the unions included. This is going also to play a certain role. The last polls show that about 80% of Russians, conscripts, they claim that they are believers. So there are still things, but let's be frank, bullying happens even in the Western armies, and this is not a secret. The army is rough. Life is rough and dirty there.
Okay, I'm afraid we've run out of time, and I don't want to infringe on your lunchtime. I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank the panel for an excellent presentation on Russian military power over the past decade. So thank you to you. Also, I'd just like to say that lunch is now available outside in the front lobby. So thank you for attending this well-subscribed panel.
We can show the food now.
Just tell them, it's a few minutes. Just for somebody who wants to stay.